Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Learn English Naturally. I'm Ethan, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Learning English is a journey and we're here to make it easier and more enjoyable for you. Today we're diving into an exciting and very practical topic, how to memorize new words smartly.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma, your co-host, and I'm so happy to be here with you. Vocabulary is one of the most important parts of learning any language, but let's face it, it can also be one of the most challenging. Have you ever spent hours memorizing a list of words only to forget them a week later? If that sounds familiar, don't worry, you're not alone.
That's so true, Emma. A lot of learners struggle with this, but here's the good news. Memorizing words doesn't have to be hard or boring. There are smarter, easier ways to make new vocabulary stick, and in today's episode we'll be sharing some of the best strategies to help you remember new words faster and use them confidently in your daily life.
Exactly, Ethan. By the end of this episode, you'll know why most people forget words quickly, how to avoid common mistakes, and most importantly, how to make learning new words both fun and effective. So grab a notebook or just listen along and let's get started.
All right, let's dive into the challenges of memorizing new words. Emma, have you noticed how many learners feel frustrated because they can't remember words they studied just days ago?
Absolutely, Ethan. It's such a common issue. One of the biggest challenges is that people often try to memorize long lists of words without any context. It's like trying to memorize random numbers. It doesn't stick because there's no connection or meaning attached.
Exactly. And I think another big problem is that learners sometimes overload themselves. They try to learn 50 or even 100 words in a single day, thinking they'll magically remember them all. But the brain just doesn't work like that, does it?
Not at all. Cramming might help you for a short-term test, but when it comes to long-term memory, it doesn't work. Plus, it can be overwhelming and discouraging when you realize you've forgotten most of the words a week later.
Right? Another challenge I've seen is a lack of repetition. Many learners don't revisit the words they've learned. They study them once and expect them to stay in their memory forever. But the truth is, without regular review, those words will fade away.
Exactly, Ethan. It's like planting a seed. You can't just water it once and expect it to grow into a tree. You need consistent care and attention. Another issue is that learners often don't use the words they're trying to learn. If you don't actively use a word in speaking or writing, it's much harder for your brain to retain it.
That's a great point, Emma. And I think one more challenge is that some learners rely too much on their first language when studying. For example, they translate every word into their native language instead of thinking in English. While translation can be helpful at the beginning, it can also slow down the process of truly understanding and using the word naturally.
Yeah, relying on translation can create a barrier. Instead, it's much better to associate the word directly with its meaning or an image, which we'll talk more about later. So to summarize, the main challenges are a lack of context, trying to learn too many words at once, not reviewing or using the words, and over-relying on translation. But don't worry, we have solutions for all of these.
Exactly. Now that we've identified the challenges, it's time to talk about strategy to overcome them. Let's explore how you can memorize new words smartly and make them part of your everyday English.
Now that we've discussed the common struggles with memorizing words, let's talk about smart strategies that can help you memorize new vocabulary effectively and make it stick. Ethan, what's the first strategy you'd recommend for learners?
One of the best ways to memorize new words is through contextual learning. Instead of memorizing words in isolation, try to learn them in sentences or stories. When you understand how a word is used in different contexts, it's much easier to remember and use it yourself.
Great point. So, let's say you're learning the word elaborate, which means to explain something in detail. Rather than just memorizing the definition, you could learn a sentence like, "Can you elaborate on that idea?" Or, "She elaborated on her plans for the weekend." By seeing the word in different situations, it becomes more meaningful, right?
Exactly, Emma. And it's not just about learning the word in a single sentence. The more examples you see and use, the better. You could create your own sentences or even use stories or articles to see how the word is applied in different contexts.
Yes. And another technique that works really well is visualization and association. This is where you create a mental image that connects the new word to something familiar. For example, if you're learning the word mountain, you might picture a huge snow-capped mountain in your mind. The image helps reinforce the meaning.
Right, and sometimes using familiar objects or experiences to associate a word with can make it even more personal. Let's say you're learning the word smooth. You could think about the smooth surface of your phone screen or the feeling of silk. That personal connection helps you remember the word more effectively.
That's a great tip, Ethan. Visualization can make words feel real and tangible, which makes them easier to recall. Now, let's move on to one of the most powerful strategies, spaced repetition. Have you ever heard of this, Emma?
Absolutely. Spaced repetition is based on the idea that you should review words at increasing intervals. So instead of studying a word every day for a week, you'd review it after a day, then 3 days, then a week, and so on. This method helps to keep the word fresh in your memory over a longer period.
Right. And this technique is supported by a lot of research on memory. Our brains tend to forget things quickly unless we reinforce them. Using apps like Anki or Quizlet, which are designed to help with spaced repetition, can make this process much easier and more organized.
And it doesn't have to be just flashcards. You can create your own spaced repetition schedule. For example, you could write down new words and review them every few days until they stick. This way you're reinforcing your memory without cramming all at once.
Exactly, Ethan. And let's not forget about using the words in real-life situations. One of the best ways to really memorize a word is to actually use it in conversation or writing. Even if you don't have a partner to practice with, you can talk to yourself in English, describe things around you, or even write a short story using the words you've learned.
Speaking of practicing alone, I highly recommend setting up a practice routine where you try to use the new words daily. For example, you could try to make at least one sentence with a new word every day. The more you use it, the more natural it will feel.
Exactly. And remember, even if you make mistakes while using the word, it's part of the learning process. The key is consistency. Keep trying to use the word, and eventually it will become a part of your active vocabulary.
And don't forget, there's a fun way to reinforce new vocabulary through flashcards and gamification. You can turn your vocabulary practice into a game by using apps that allow you to test yourself or even make your own flashcards with pictures or example sentences. This makes learning feel more like play, and we all know that makes it more enjoyable.
Flashcards are great, especially if you make them with some creativity. Maybe by adding a personal touch like a funny drawing or a memorable sentence. The more fun and interactive you make it, the better.
And for those who love visual aids, another way to help your memory is through mnemonics. A memory technique where you create a funny or memorable story to link the word to its meaning. For example, if you're learning the word gargantuan meaning huge, you could imagine a giant gargoyle that's as big as a mountain.
That's a fantastic example, Ethan. Mnemonics work because they're often so absurd or funny that they stick in your mind more easily. It's a great tool for remembering tricky words.
Finally, watching and listening to English content like podcasts, movies, and songs can also help you remember words. When you hear new words in context, it reinforces your memory, and because you're listening to them, naturally it's easier to remember them.
Absolutely. So to recap, the smartest ways to memorize words are through 1. Contextual learning, using words in sentences or stories. 2. Visualization and association, linking words to images or familiar things. 3. Spaced repetition, reviewing words at increasing intervals. 4. Using words daily in speaking or writing. 5. Flashcards and gamification, making learning fun. 6. Mnemonics, creating funny or memorable stories. 7. Watching and listening to English media, reinforcing words. In context, these strategies can make learning vocabulary smarter, not harder.
Remember, it's all about finding what works best for you and sticking with it. And trust me, the more consistent you are, the better your results will be. Now that we've covered some solid strategies to memorize words, let's talk about the fun side of learning vocabulary, because let's face it, learning English doesn't have to be boring, right?
Absolutely, Ethan. Making vocabulary learning fun is key to keeping yourself motivated and engaged. One of my favorite fun techniques is word association games. You can play a game where you think of a new word and try to associate it with as many different things as possible.
I love that. For example, if the word is sparkling, you could associate it with things like fireworks, a shiny necklace, or even a cool glass of soda. The more connections you make, the easier it will be to remember the word.
Exactly. And you can do this on your own or even with a friend. It turns learning into a game. Another fun way to remember words is through storytelling. Create little stories using the new words you've learned. The sillier the better.
Totally. The more creative you get with your stories, the more likely you are to remember the words. For example, if you're learning the word enormous, you could make up a story about an enormous pizza that's so big it needs its own zip code.
I love that. The funnier the story, the more likely your brain will latch onto it. Another playful technique is vocabulary scavenger hunts. You can challenge yourself to find new words in books, movies, or even outside in the world. For instance, if you're watching a movie, try to write down 5 new words that you hear and use them in your own sentences later.
That's a fun one, especially because it adds a bit of adventure to the learning process. And speaking of movies and shows, karaoke is a surprisingly fun method for learning new words. You can pick a song in English, learn the lyrics, and pay attention to new vocabulary. Singing along helps with pronunciation and also reinforces the words in your memory.
That's such a great idea, Ethan. Music has a way of sticking in our minds, so why not use it to your advantage? Another fun method is role-playing. Find a friend or even practice on your own and pretend to be in different situations where you can use the new vocabulary. For example, pretend you're ordering food at a restaurant and practice words related to food, or act out a shopping trip and use new shopping-related words.
Role-playing is a fantastic way to practice speaking in a low-pressure environment. It gives you a chance to use new words naturally, which is one of the best ways to make them stick. And if you're practicing alone, you can still do it in front of a mirror. Pretend you're having a conversation and use as many new words as possible. That's a fun way to practice without worrying about making mistakes.
And if you like a challenge, you can even make your own word quizzes. Set up a little quiz for yourself where you write down definitions or use the words in sentences and then try to guess which word matches each definition. You could do this once a week and test your progress.
That's a great way to track your growth while keeping it fun. Plus, when you get the answers right, it gives you that sense of achievement that motivates you to keep learning.
Exactly. And another fun way to reinforce vocabulary is through comics or cartoons. If you like drawing, create a comic strip using the new words, or if you're not an artist, you can find online comics in English. The visual context helps reinforce the meaning of the words while keeping it lighthearted and enjoyable.
Wow, these are some amazing fun techniques. To summarize, here are the playful methods that can help you retain vocabulary. 1. Word association games, linking words to as many things as possible. 2. Storytelling, create funny, memorable stories using new words. 3. Vocabulary scavenger hunts, find new words in movies or the world around you. 4. Karaoke, sing along to songs to learn new words and improve pronunciation. 5. Role-playing, act out situations using new vocabulary. 6. Word quizzes, test yourself to track progress and stay motivated. 7. Comics or cartoons, draw or read comics to reinforce new vocabulary with visuals.
I hope these fun techniques make vocabulary learning more exciting for you. Remember, the more enjoyable and interactive the process is, the more likely you are to stick with it, and the more you practice, the easier it becomes to remember those words.
Exactly, Emma. Learning doesn't have to be stressful. Make it a game, make it fun, and the vocabulary will stick. Now let's move on to some common mistakes learners make when memorizing words. These are important to avoid to make sure you're on the right track.
Now that we've explored fun ways to learn and remember vocabulary, let's discuss some common mistakes that learners often make when memorizing new words. These are pitfalls you definitely want to avoid to make your learning more efficient and effective.
One of the biggest mistakes I see is learning words in isolation. While it's great to learn new vocabulary, just memorizing a word without understanding its context or how it's used in real conversations doesn't help much in the long run.
Exactly. You can remember a word, but if you don't know how to use it in a sentence or in real life, you won't be able to actually speak with it. It's better to learn words in context, whether through sentences, stories, or conversations, so that you understand their true meaning and usage.
Another mistake is cramming words all at once. Trying to memorize a long list of words in one sitting can be overwhelming and inefficient. The brain can only retain so much information at once, and cramming doesn't give the brain enough time to absorb and process the vocabulary.
That's right. It's much better to break down your learning into smaller, manageable chunks. A great way to avoid cramming is to use spaced repetition, as we mentioned earlier. Spacing out your review sessions gives your brain time to absorb the words and helps commit them to long-term memory.
Another mistake is focusing too much on the definition instead of the usage of the word. You might memorize the definition of a word, but if you don't know how to use it in sentences or conversations, it won't stick.
Exactly. Definitions alone don't always give you the full picture. That's why it's important to learn words with context. Understand how the word fits into different situations, how it interacts with other words, and how it can change meaning depending on usage.
Also, many learners fall into the trap of not reviewing regularly. They might learn new words, but if they don't review them often enough, they forget them just as quickly. Without regular practice and review, it's hard to make those words stick.
Consistency is key. Reviewing words in a spaced repetition system, as we discussed earlier, will help you to retain them over time. Even spending a few minutes each day reviewing can make a big difference in your vocabulary retention.
Another mistake is fearing mistakes. A lot of learners are afraid to use new words because they don't want to make errors. But the truth is, making mistakes is a normal part of learning. It's much better to try using the word in conversation and get it wrong than to never use it at all.
Exactly, Ethan. The more you use the word, the more you'll learn from your mistakes. It's about practice and not being afraid to make errors. So don't be shy, speak up, and use the new words you've learned.
Lastly, some learners stick to the same vocabulary and don't challenge themselves with more complex words. If you only focus on easy basic words, you won't expand your vocabulary as much as you could. It's important to keep pushing yourself and learning words that stretch your vocabulary range.
That's a great point. Don't be afraid to go beyond the basics. Challenge yourself with new, more advanced vocabulary as you get more comfortable with the language. It'll help you sound more fluent and express yourself more clearly.
So, to summarize, here are some common mistakes to avoid when memorizing words. 1. Learning words in isolation. Learn words in context to understand their usage. 2. Cramming all at once. Break up your learning into smaller, manageable chunks. 3. Focusing only on definitions. Learn how to use words in sentences and conversations. 4. Not reviewing regularly. Make consistent review part of your learning routine. 5. Fearing mistakes. Don't be afraid to use new words and make mistakes. 6. Sticking to easy words. Challenge yourself with more complex vocabulary.
Great recap, Ethan. Avoiding these mistakes will help you memorize words more effectively and use them confidently. Now, to finish up, we'll share some final tips on how to stay motivated in your vocabulary learning journey. To wrap it up, we hope you feel more confident in your vocabulary learning journey. If you keep using the strategies we've shared, stay consistent, and don't be afraid to have fun with it, you'll definitely see progress in your English skills.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Learn English Naturally. We hope you found these tips helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with friends who might benefit from it.